Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you have myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Brennan as we talk about the opening weekend for Joker. Remember, as always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. So, breaking down this week's top 5, no surprise, in the number 1 spot is Joker, opening up to $93.5 million domestic, followed by Abominable in its number 2 week at the box office with $12 million domestic. Downton Abbey is in the number 3 spot at $8 million domestic, followed by Hustlers in the number 4 spot at $6.3 million, and It Chapter 2 rounding out the top 5 with $5.35 million. So it's not a very competitive box office. But Joker has taken the weekend by a lot, and its debut just incredibly strong. It's sitting at about $234 million worldwide, which is just crazy numbers for something that is not part of, a main DC universe and something that's really experimental for DC and experimental for the character. But I think this haul is just a testament to, Joaquin Phoenix's presence and just kind of the attention he commands, as well as just the Joker as a character. This is arguably the most iconic villain there is out there in terms of comic books, and just the fact that this has been a movie that's been hyped up and everybody's had an eye on it for quite a while and heard nothing but glowing reviews and awards coming out of all the major festivals. So Joker had a lot going for it, and it is succeeding on all accounts.
Yeah, for sure. There are no surprises for me in the money it's making. $93 million domestically. I'm not surprised by that at all. However, $234 million worldwide, that's a very, very strong number for its first weekend. This film is going to be making a ton of money. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are definitely on the way for this film. I definitely see it passing 500, 600, 700 mil. I think 800 might be like the stopping point for this film, but who knows how the legs will be this early on. I think we'll have to wait and see for that. But I'm not too surprised with this. I think that the Joker is one of the most iconic characters in probably the history of pop culture. I think that this film had just so much, not just controversy, but just so much talk behind it for months and months. And you kind of have, on one hand, you have big fans of comic book films, and you have big DC fans that are going to be powering this film and hyping up this movie. You have people that are kind of, they were younger when the Dark Knight trilogy came out. They loved Heath Ledger's Joker, and now they kind of want to revisit that dark, gritty, superhero type, comic book type film in the 2019 Joker here. So I think that you have a mix of a bunch of things, and I'm not too surprised with this. This is a ton of money, and it's just going to continue to rake.
Yeah, so this is a massive debut, but it is actually the largest October opening ever. So it passed Venom, which Venom set the record last year with a little over 80 million. Joker, again, passed it with 93.5 million, and it actually got really close to Justice League's opening weekend, which is just kind of weird to think about, that one villain was able to gross higher than the entire Justice League. Almost higher, so it's about 0.5 million short of Justice League's opener, but it is a very strong opening, 4th highest R-rated opening ever, coming in just behind the Deadpool movies and It. This is a financial success by all accounts, especially because of how low the budget is to begin with. So the budget estimates I've seen have been around 55-60 million, depending on the source, but it's already grossed $234 million worldwide, which would be strong numbers for any superhero movie, but a superhero movie just on a small budget like this is just incredible numbers.
For sure. And just you saying that, almost making as much money as Justice League made, that's just shocking. And an R-rated film as well. Like, there are people turned away because they're too young. With Justice League, that wasn't really an issue. Joker is just the testament to this character. That's what this film's showing at the box office. $93 million domestically first weekend, $234 million worldwide. This is huge, and I think only the Joker could do this. I think if you think of kind of some of pop culture's greatest and biggest kind of villains, I don't know if there are many others that could make this much money in a standalone film. I think that Joker's probably the king when it comes to that.
Yeah, and another just kind of fun little tidbit is Todd Phillips actually has 2 movies in the top 10 highest grossing R-rated openings. So Joker would be one, but The Hangover Part 2 is actually number 9 on that list. So he's got a pretty strong R-rated draw to his movies. But yeah, like Joker is just performing incredibly well. As to the legs and just the longevity of its success, I think you and I have a little bit different opinions. I think this movie is going to be much more top-heavy, just due to the subject matter and the fact that we've got some other pretty big R-rated movies coming out here in the next couple weeks. But this is by no means going to stop. It's just it'll gross a lot of money. It's just how much money is it going to gross is kind of the question.
I have a feeling that a few different variables kind of go into this, and I think first weekend you're seeing there's a lot of controversy behind this movie. So many people were hyped for this film. All of them came to the theaters first weekend, but a lot of people who maybe thought about the controversy, maybe didn't really want to go right away, wanted to see what people thought of the movie first. I think they'll be going in the coming weeks. I think mix that with kind of just the power of DC fans really feeling like they have something good on their hands and maybe repeat viewings that way. I think that this film's going to be showing some great legs. Maybe a decent drop next weekend, but I think it'll stagnate after that, and I think that it'll just continue to make a ton of money over the next couple months here as we head into the award season.
Yeah, and I think, this movie had sort of an uphill battle. I mean, just because of how controversial it's been. And with a lot of the reactions coming out of the festivals were really good, but a lot of the reactions coming out of opening weekend, its Rotten Tomatoes score dropped quite a bit, which, that's not necessarily the best way to go to see how good or bad a movie is, but it's normally a pretty solid indicator of how it's doing. It does have a B+ for a cinema score, which isn't just the greatest, but it's still not bad. So I think it'll have decent legs. I just don't think it's going to have phenomenal legs.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to take a look at that. I think next weekend might not be the complete tell-all with how this movie's going to last, but I think that as we kind of progress into the mid-October area, maybe closer to when Jojo Rabbit Zombieland 2 come out, I think that'll be kind of the teller. I mean, middle of October, we'll kind of take a look back at Joker and see how it's doing. But I think this movie, I mean, I'm in the belief that this thing is going to have legs and it's going to make a ton of money. It'll be neat to see though as time progresses.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we do want to talk about Joker a little bit more, but we are saving that for a different episode so we can really dive in and give everyone a chance to see it, because this is a controversial movie and we all have lots of thoughts. And so we will share those at some point. We just don't want to spoil anything or dive too deep into it right off the bat. So that kind of wraps up what we're going to talk about with Joker for now, and we'll move on, unfortunately, to Abominable, which pulled in a little over 12 million this weekend, had about a 42% drop almost, and it's just not a huge winner. It's sitting at about 76 million worldwide after its second weekend, with a production budget of 75 million, which these are numbers that you really don't want to see if you're looking for a success. Abominable is just kind of it's not outright flopping, but it's crashing pretty hard.
Yeah, and I think that we're seeing this year a lot of animated movies show better legs than we initially expect them to, or more family-oriented movies. I mean, we saw with Aladdin great legs, Toy Story 4, we saw some great legs there, and then even just kind of with overseas grosses. And initially, domestically, we saw Secret Life of Pets 2 kind of bomb, but then overseas it kind of picked up. I think that this movie doesn't quite have that sort of power because it's not kind of franchise connected. But what you were touching on last week, this film didn't really put a lot into marketing, it seems. It was a little bit low key. So a budget's at $75 million. They've just passed that now. They might be able to recoup the budget and maybe turn a small profit, but there's no way this thing is being a big hit for the studio, and it's kind of just another one of those kind of dismal, decent, kind of mediocre September box office runs for an animated film.
Yeah, and it runs into some pretty big competition. So this coming week we have The Addams Family, which is going to open up, so it's got animated competition there. And then just a little bit over a month from now we have Frozen 2. So it's definitely not the best time to really be trying to go on legs, just because there are new movies in the same genre and in the same style that are going to be opening up and competing But if we saw anything with like Secret Life of Pets or even Toy Story, animated movies tend to have pretty solid legs regardless. So I don't, again, I don't think this is going to be just an outright flop. It's just not going to be a huge success.
I look at this film and I think that they probably should have maybe thrown it into theaters a week earlier even. I mean, it came out in a weekend where it was the only major release. But you look at the week prior to it, we saw Ad Astra, Downton Abbey, and Rambo. I think that it could have fit in there and kind of maximized profits a little bit better. I mean, that would have made for a really crowded box office, but the same audience that's going to see Rambo and Downton Abbey is probably not going to go see Abominable. So, I mean, they probably should have went for a earlier release, maybe a midweek release even, just like the midweek before it came out that opening weekend. But it's definitely not looking like a huge hit. Kind of just kind of a mediocre run for Abominable.
Yeah, it's a movie that I don't think we'll be talking about just a ton more, but I think it'll be just kind of there under the surface for a while. So we'll move on to Downton Abbey, which pulled in about $8 million this week, with only a 44% drop in its third week at the box office. Which Downton Abbey is just going strong. I mean, we've talked about this. This is a really big hit for Focus Features. This is just had a built-in audience, and they keep returning after a couple weekends, and it's just got solid legs, sitting at about 135 million worldwide, which is just really great. This is a success. It's one of the better successes from this past month.
Yeah, I mean, there's not too much more to say about this film other than the fact that it really is, as you said, just that built-in audience that's driving this thing. And maybe the word of mouth is really strong now after the first few weeks. It's kind of spreading. I mean, this movie's up over 135 million worldwide and on a small budget, I believe, last week of, I think it was around $10 million, if not a little bit less or a little bit more. This movie is just showing that it has legs, and that's kind of surprising because we expected this to be a little bit more top heavy, but Downton Abbey is kind of showing that it's going to be here to stay for the next few weeks. And I mean, it's great for Focus Features, and it's a really neat little thing for a film based off a television series.
Yeah, and it actually expanded just a little bit this week, opened in 158 more theaters, which isn't just a huge expansion, but it is. I mean, it's still going. I think this movie will stay relevant for a little while just because it is a very specific audience that this movie is going to, and October normally doesn't cater to that audience. Older people tend to kind of stay away from horror movies, and I think this will kind of be their go-to for the next couple of weeks for sure.
For sure, I definitely agree with that. And just seeing that it had a theater boost this weekend, even if it's just 158 theaters, kind of on top of what it already had at about 3,400, that's a good sign. And I think that the theaters are a little bit more optimistic. The studio's happy about what's going on, and it's just a really good sign for this film financially.
So we'll move on to Hustlers, which is in its fourth weekend at the box office, pulled in a little bit over 6.3 million domestically, and is just, again, kind of like Downton Abbey and like Joker so far, is just another really big hit. So it's got a production budget of about 20 million, and it's already pulled in 110, little over 110 million worldwide, and it's just been a huge kind of breakaway hit. Nobody really expected just tremendous things from this movie going into it, but it has definitely surprised in terms of how much it's pulling in.
Yeah, this movie pretty much this weekend smashed past $100 million. It was sitting at about $98 million heading into the weekend, turning $6.3 million domestically, a little bit more overseas. It's up to $110 million worldwide now. Hustlers is here to stay. If this movie can continue to have drops of around 40% on a week-to-week basis, Jennifer Lopez will stay in that awards talk, and she will stay in the competition. So we're going to keep our eye out on that for everyone. It's really interesting that this film's kind of grossing this sort of money, and I think it's a testament to the star power of the cast and J-Lo in general. And it is a pretty good movie. I really did enjoy it. And just to see it making this much money this far along the line, now we're 4 weeks in, I mean, it's a pretty neat thing. And I could definitely see this movie maybe reaching that 150 depending on the legs down the road. Maybe it'll get another expansion down the road, maybe when we get into award season. But it's pretty interesting to kind of watch the developments with Hustlers.
Yeah, and I mean, this movie has existed basically off of its domestic gross, which is really all it needed, because in the larger foreign markets, this movie's not going to be played. just due to the nature of the characters in it. And so it's really only needed a strong domestic haul, and it has done way more than that so far, and is probably just going to be a pretty buzzy movie for the rest of the year.
And I think that a good sign for this film is that you look at October, you look at November, and even into December, it's going to still be coming out. I mean, Brazil is it's going to drop in Brazil in December. It's got Spain and Italy in November. It's got a bunch of European markets in October. So as you said, it's probably not going to be making a ton of money overseas, but it will see kind of a decent capitalization on just a little bit more change overseas with some of these later releases.
Yeah, I completely agree. So we will move on to It Chapter 2, which rounds out the top 5 in its 5th week. I actually kind of like the top 5 for this week all lined up with how many weeks they've been at the box office. So It Chapter 2 rounds that out with 5.35 million. It's another about 48% drop, and I mean It 2 is pretty late in the game at this point. It's sitting at about $436 million worldwide, so it's certainly not going to reach the heights of It Chapter 1, but it is still a pretty solid success, especially for a horror movie. $436 million is really strong for the horror genre.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you said, it's not going to reach the heights of the first one, but this movie is a huge success for Warner Bros. They're definitely very happy with this, and there's not too much more to say about this film. As you said, 5 weeks in the box office now, and I mean, it's showing decent legs, 48% drop this weekend. I mean, that's decently impressive, but it'll die off over the next few weeks for sure as we get into some of the more horror-based releases in October. But this is a pretty good run for It Chapter 2, and it's quite impressive for this franchise as a whole.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just a testament to kind of Stephen King's prowess and name recognition. I mean, in terms of horror, he's the most consistent genre, or the most consistent franchise, really. Just because he's been around, he's been making movies, or having movies made from his works since the 70s, or late 70s, early 80s. And like his name draws people, his movies make money most of the time. They do bounce up and down in quality quite a bit, but Stephen King is always pretty consistent.
For sure, and I think that we're kind of seeing that. I mean, a lot of his films are not a lot of them break out quite like this one or the first one in this franchise, but for the most part, these films do pretty respectable numbers at the box office.
So that rounds out the top 5, but there are a couple other releases that either expanded or actually released in a limited theater count this week. So we're going to talk about Judy, which had a limited release last week and has slowly begun to expand and is sitting at around $4.4 million domestically, sitting at a total of $8.9 million domestically with this week and last week. And it's slowly expanding here over the next few months. This is a movie that I don't think it's going to be just a huge success. I think Judy Garland is kind of dated in terms of who her core audience is going to be, in terms of, you know, who's actually going to come and see the movie. But she's iconic enough that I think it'll make a decent profit. Depending on the awards attention it gets, it could make even more when we get further down the line. But right now it's making money. It's not really failing, not really succeeding.
Yeah, I think what they're doing with this film is very smart. They're not kind of throwing all their eggs in one basket and throwing it at 4,000 theaters first weekend. I think you're gonna see a slow kind of gradual release. Last week we saw around 400 theaters came out in. This weekend it's now up to 1,500. We'll probably see it expand a little bit more. Overseas wise, it's going to be coming out slowly over the next few months in a bunch of foreign markets. So we're kind of seeing this movie open up to different groups of people at kind of a slower pace. And I think that's a smart way to do this film instead of kind of getting it out there and having the buzz die quick. I think it's good to kind of slowly get this thing out there and milk it kind of as it gets towards award season, because I do think it has some awards play for a Best Actress nod, 100%. I think Renee Zellweger is fantastic in this movie. I don't think there's much else that this movie has a play for, but in that regard, I think that they're doing a smart thing.
Yeah, and they definitely played it well off of the film festival buzz. So it premiered and had a pretty decent buzz overall. I've seen mostly positive reactions to this movie so far. And releasing just shortly after that, about a week or two after the festival, depending on which festival you want to look at it debuting at. Helps keep it kind of in the collective public consciousness. Just people are aware of it. People know it's in theaters. They've heard good things about it recently. And I think with that slow expansion, they're kind of ensuring that people are at least thinking or talking about this all the way to award season.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you saw the film. We maybe can dive in a little bit. What did you kind of think of it overall? And do you think that Renee Zellweger can make a play come award season?
Yeah, I think she's easily the highlight of this movie. Her performance was just it was just great. It was a good interpretation of Judy Garland, and she did have to share the role a little bit, but managed to really take Judy in a different direction than most people know her from. Because I mean, when you're the star of The Wizard of Oz, that's going to be kind of your thing. That's where most people know her from. That's what most people are going to associate Judy Garland as a person with. Is just that 14-year-old girl walking through Oz with with all those colorful characters. But in reality, her adult life was much different than that. And I think Renee Zellweger really just inhabited that and really just brought it to life. As for the movie as a whole, I kind of have mixed opinions about it. It wasn't the best thing I've ever seen, and it is kind of misguided in what it's trying to represent, but it does paint the old Hollywood system in a more depressing light than most people probably remember it from, and I think that was a good choice for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much there to grab onto in this film. I think that it lacks a little bit of drive and a little bit of its own kind of flair. But I think Renee Zellweger carries this movie 100%, and she makes it a watchable and somewhat enjoyable film. I mean, there's a lot of kind of dark subject matter that they touch on in this film, but for what it's worth, she gives a knockout performance and one of my favorite performances from a lead actress this year, 100%. But besides her, there isn't really too much to cling on to in this film, and that's why it's great that there really aren't many scenes that don't include her at all. I mean, this is pretty much 100%. The camera's on her pretty much at all times, and I think that's the smartest way they could have done this thing because she really owned the role. But overall, I agree with you there. I have mixed feelings towards the film. I mean, I definitely would recommend someone to check it out, and I would give it a positive review, but it's not the best film of the year, and I think they could have done a few things a little bit better, but for her performance, this is a one to watch out for.
Yeah, and I would also like to commend this movie for casting Michael Gambon. It's just nice to see Dumbledore wherever you can get him.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll move on to another smaller release this weekend, which was Lucy in the Sky, which is not really performing. It had a very limited debut, so it was only 37 theaters, pulled in just barely 55,000, which is only about a 1,500 per screen average, which is pretty abysmal for your opening weekend, especially in a limited release. And the reactions to this movie have not been kind in the slightest.
So I was definitely looking forward to Lucy in the Sky, but it's definitely not looking positive for this film. I mean, right out of TIFF, this thing got ripped apart, and I was looking forward to this movie. We had a pretty good filmmaker in Noah Hawley behind this project. Natalie Portman, I'm a big fan of, and I thought the first trailer was good, and it had a pretty neat premise overall. But this movie just got torn apart by critics, and I thought maybe there could still be a play for Natalie Portman because it is Natalie Portman. She's got that star power, but it needed the box office to back it up. And the per screen average this weekend being at just 1,500, I mean, this movie's going nowhere, and it's going to be kind of depressing to see it expand over the next few weeks. However many theaters it does expand to, it's going to be kind of tough to watch that.
Yeah, I think if this is indicating anything, it's that Lucy in the Sky is gonna crash pretty hard. I don't see this ever cracking the top 5, let alone the top 10.
No, I mean, I think they'd be lucky to push through that top 15.
Yeah, this one's gonna be long gone. So that wraps up rather depressingly all the new movie news going on, but there is still kind of movie news going on. So if you're familiar with this guy named Martin Scorsese, he's kind of an up and comer in the movie world. But he had a quote this week that was not well received by the internet when he was asked about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and just Marvel movies in general. He said they were not cinema and related them to theme parks. And so the exact quote was, "I don't see them. I tried, but that's not cinema." Scorsese, that's what he told Empire Magazine. "Honestly, the closest I can think of them, as well made as they are, with actors doing the best they can under the circumstances, is theme parks. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being." So he said this the week that Joker released, which is kind of set itself up as the superhero equivalent of a Scorsese movie. And of course, this is Marvel versus DC, so you have all of the Marvel and DC shills attacking each other on the internet, as well as just all the Marvel people just obsessing over this, which in the grand scheme of things, I don't think this quote's really a big deal. Whether or not Martin Scorsese likes your favorite superhero movie shouldn't really determine whether or not you can enjoy it, but that's where we are as a society.
I think it was a little bit of a misstep to put this out there, but I mean, it's Martin Scorsese. I mean, if you look at the film world, he's one of the most elite people in it. And I mean, you look at kind of the Mount Rushmore of directors over the last 20, 30 years, 40 years even, he's probably on that Mount Rushmore. I mean, it's hard to go against him, but, or it's hard to say that what he says doesn't matter, but I really don't think it does in the grand scheme of things. I think this is something that in a few weeks we'll have forgotten about. I just feel bad for some of the people that took this in the wrong way, or kind of took this to heart, especially James Gunn. He kind of talked back. He didn't bite back at Scorsese, but he did say he was saddened by the comments. I mean, he said that one of his favorite directors is Martin Scorsese. He looks up to him, and he was a little bit upset by Scorsese's opinions on movies that he makes. So I mean, that's kind of upsetting to read about and think about. But overall, I don't think this is a really big deal. It is kind of coming at an interesting time with Joker, as you said, and the DC versus Marvel. I mean, there's always something going on. And as you said, we were kind of done talking about movies there, but there's more movie stuff to talk about. It kind of never ends. But overall, I don't think this is going to have a huge impact on anything. It's kind of just going to be banter for the next few days and hopefully die off.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not going to derail the Marvel universe. I mean, they just put out the highest grossing movie ever within 6 months. And it just came at a time where, the DC Marvel antagonism couldn't have been higher. As DC is really starting to branch out. And my favorite thing about the quote is I don't think a lot of the DC people, like your Batman versus Superman is a good movie people, really understand that what Scorsese is saying about Marvel movies also applies to DC movies. It's just a dumb thing to get upset over, and the internet has kind of had a field day with it.
And I think that when you think about this, just kind of in retrospect and all, I mean, it's not going to have a huge impact down the line, but I mean, what he says, he's just a different type of filmmaker. I mean, he has his own genre, he has his own niches that he kind of follows, and he's just not, he's an older guy, he's a part of a different generation, and if he doesn't really, as you said, like your favorite superhero movie, I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, I don't personally agree with what he said at all. But I'm not outraged by the comments at all, and I think that you kind of just have to put things into perspective.
Yeah, and I think you really just have to have a clear understanding of like who Scorsese is as a director, what kind of movies does he make, what kind of movies is he associated with, and B, you just have to see where he comes from. I mean, he's one of the older working directors out there right now. He comes from a very different era of filmmaking. His influences are vastly different from the influences now, and the films he created are vastly different from, what's popular right now. And you really just have to look at it in context.
For sure. And I mean, there's not much more besides that. I mean, he's a big name in film, but this isn't gonna, as you said, derail the MCU, not one bit.
Yeah. It's not really going to change anything. It's just a good excuse for people to get mad at each other. So that's where we're at. So that kind of wraps up the goings-on of what's happening in the movie world for this past weekend. And again, we will dive into Joker with much more detail a little bit later on. And next week, we'll be back talking about the immaculate Ang Lee classic Gemini Man, as well as the Addams Family reboot.